Okay, so in this topic attack, we will address the question, what is the role of the gods and the women of Troy? Which is broad enough to give us some ideas that we could potentially use in a range of other topics as well that are related to the gods. Now, moving into our definitional ground, we need to unpack the term role, which we can understand in two ways, which helps with addressing the implications of the question. First, in terms of their role in the world of the text, and secondly, the dramatic or theatrical role they play as part of Euripides' messaging. My first question to generate my content relates to the role of the gods in the world of the text, and I am listing as many answers as possible here that I can use later. So within Trojan society in ancient Greece, gods are regarded as guardians of religious ritual and traditions of worship. They also legislate morality through the divine laws, particularly around concepts such as piety and sacrilege. Linked to this role, they are also the arbiters of justice, their divine powers enabling them to intervene in the lives of mortals, to either protect them or enact punishment or retribution. And as a result of this, they are an object of hope for the mortals, but also of blame, as the Trojan women blame them for their abandonment in their time of strife. Our second question addresses the purpose of the gods as a dramatic device. How does Euripides use them as characters to convey views and values? Again, I've just listed some ideas here. First, the appearance of the gods in the prologue, with Poseidon's elegy laced with graphic imagery, as well as Athena's anger, serves largely to condemn Greek brutality. In addition, the failure of the gods to act as protectors in this scene also emphasises the hopelessness of the women. In opposition to the usual structure of a Greek play, there will be no reversal of the characters' fortunes through divine intervention or deus ex machina. The intervention that will occur, which is the punishment of the Greek generals on their return home, does remind us of the power of the gods, but also their inherent narcissism and frivolity. And as the play continues and the absence of the gods becomes more pronounced, the choric odes and the lament of the women shift to blame, and thus divine beings serve as a means for Euripides to condemn worship as a futile exercise for mortals to engage in, which is part of the play's general view on how life is rendered meaningless by war. Now, based on the above, here are some ideas for potential focus points as paragraphs for an essay. The first focuses on the role of the gods within the world of the text as guardians of morality and religious piety. Now, this is evident particularly in the prologue, through Athena's condemnation of Ajax's assault on Cassandra and the desecration of her temple as an act of indecency, as well as Poseidon's lament for Troy and its rituals of worship, as he says the behaviour of the generals flout all religious feeling, and that there is no longer anything left worth a god's consideration. So through their descriptive imagery, their elegy, their wrath, we are invited to condemn the moral transgression of the mortals. Now, the second focus point is linked to the first one and could potentially be combined into the same paragraph depending on the topic, but it focuses not only on their role as guardians but as arbiters of justice. Now, in this case, the role of the gods is to use their power to intervene and apply punitive justice and retribution for acts of impiety. Again, the prologue is useful here, particularly on pages 7 to 9, where the two gods make their pact and then graphically describe the fate of the Greek generals as punishment for their acts of desecration. This is also supported in Cassandra's prophecies on page 23, as she relates the fate of Odysseus and Agamemnon at the hands of divine forces. In both of these scenes, the traditional role of gods as divine legislators with interventionist powers over the lives of mortals is strongly reinforced. Now, the next paragraph shifts gears to examine Euripides' view of the gods as blameworthy agents in allowing the shocking deeds of the Greeks to proceed. So while the women clearly condemn the Greeks throughout the play, it is the gods who are often cast as agents of harm and blame. Now, the strongest evidence for this is in the choric odes, where they consecutively blame specific gods for their suffering. In the first stasimon, they blame the deceptive ambush strategy and subsequent barbarity of the Greeks on the power of Pallas Athene, while in the second stasimon they charge Ganymede for his apathy and neglect of his own city, while in stasimon 3 on page 49 they directly accuse Zeus of betrayal. So the chorus builds a consistent case against the gods for their negligence throughout the play, which is echoed in the individual laments of Hecuba and Andromache as well. Now, the next focus point links to the previous one, and again you might find a way to combine these views. The implication of that previous indictment against the gods is that they are a vain source of mortal hope. Euripides thus suggests that in seeking the intervention of gods, mortals are foolish, and that their worship of such vain and flippant deities is naive. Now, evidence of this is in both Hecuba and Andromache's declaration of the gods as hating them early on, and Hecuba's nihilistic laments in the final stages of the play, which fully articulate the worthlessness of prayer due to the vindictive nature of the gods. Thus, the ostensible role of the gods as protectors, according to Euripides, has been negated by their absolving of their responsibilities. Now, the worthlessness of prayer can be linked to the wider view of the play, which is the meaninglessness or absurdity of life, particularly in the aftermath of a genocidal war. In this case, the motivations of the gods, they are arbitrary and unknowable to the women, and their abandonment of the Trojans is incomprehensible to the faithful. And as Hecuba and Andromache note early on, the whole world's upturned, which implies the moral confusion created by the atrocities the gods permitted. So this critical questioning of the order and reliability of the forces that govern their lives is articulated by the angry, grieving Hecuba after the unheard-of savagery of Astyanax's death. Note here that while she condemns the Greeks, she ultimately declares the divine as nonsensical, as life no longer has pattern and meaning, that the role of the gods has almost disappeared. So by the conclusion of the play, Euripides really does warn against seeking the intervention of the gods, as they are indifferent to the suffering of mortals and instead are consumed by their own petty concerns. In this way, while the powerful protectorate role of the gods is reinforced in the vengeance enacted on the Greeks, it's also rejected by Euripides in his depiction of the women's sufferings, and ultimately he questions the worth of religious ritual and placing faith in divine intervention. So good luck and have a go at writing this one up.